To begin scoring your deer at the 90-degree image orientation, first select the state or region in which your deer was photographed. Then select the age of the deer, if known, otherwise select unknown. Select 90 degrees for the image orientation, and then select the reference or physical feature you will be using. Ear width is the best feature, whereas eyeball width is the second best. For this purpose, I will select ear width, and to begin, I will select Measure Ear Width feature. My mouse turns into the pen, indicating that I'm ready to draw on the image. And again, I will select on the outer edges of the ear so that the line is perpendicular to the main axis of the ear. This line demonstrates the proper way to measure an ear width feature of a deer at the 90-degree image orientation. To finish, select Record Ear Width feature. For this demonstration, I will use the eyeball width for the deer. To continue, select Measure Eyeball Width feature. Here, I'm ready to measure the actual eyeball width of the deer, not the entire eye socket, which would be this measurement. I want to select the outside edges of the actual eyeball. This line demonstrates the proper way to measure eyeball width of a deer at the 90-degree image orientation. To continue, select Record Eyeball Width feature. If you are unhappy with your line, select Erase Lines and begin over. For the 90 degrees, you will not measure the inside spread. This measurement is calculated based on the length of the longest main beam of the deer. To continue in the steps, select Estimate Inside Spread. You're now ready to enter the number of close and far typical points. At the 90-degree image orientation, this is the close beam, and the beam in the background is the far beam. The close beam has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 close typical points. The far beam has 1, 2, 3, 4 far typical points. When finished from the drop-down list, select Measure Close Main Beam to continue. You're now ready to begin measuring the close main beam. Start at the base of the antler on the outside or bottom edge. Continue to the point of the beam. When satisfied, select Record Close Main Beam. You're now ready to measure the far main beam. Again, starting at the base, go along the bottom edge of the main beam to the point. Once you're satisfied with this, select Record Far Main Beam. You're now ready to measure the close tines, beginning with close typical tine 1. Starting where the typical tine meets the main beam to the point, record close tine 1. For close tine 2, again begin where the typical tine meets the main beam and extends to the end. When satisfied, record close tine 2. Do this for all close typical tines, and when complete, go to the far typical tines. You are now ready to measure the far typical tines, beginning with far typical tine 1. Start where the typical tine meets the main beam and go to the tip. When satisfied, select Record Far Tine 1. For far tine 2, begin where the far typical tine 2 meets the main beam and follow it to the tip. When satisfied, record far tine 2. Do this for all far typical tines. You will then be directed to the circumference on the close side. You are now ready to measure close circumference 1. This occurs between the base of the antler and the first typical tine. This line demonstrates the proper way to measure a close circumference 1 at the 90-degree image orientation. When ready, select Record Close Circumference 1. For close circumference 2, it will fall between the first typical tine and the second typical tine. This image or line demonstrates the proper way to measure close circumference 2. Close circumference 3 falls between the second and third typical tines. This line demonstrates the proper way to measure close circumference 3. For this steer, close circumference 4 does actually fall between the third and fourth typical tines. This line demonstrates the proper way to measure close circumference 4. You're now ready to measure far circumferences. Again, far circumference 1 falls between the base and the first typical tine. Far circumference 2 falls between the first and second typical tine. Far circumference 3 falls between the second and third typical tine. And far circumference 4 falls between the third and fourth typical tine. However, on the far side, the fourth typical tine is the main beam. Therefore, far circumference 4 is measured halfway between the end of far typical tine 3 and the tip of the main beam. This line demonstrates the proper way to measure far circumference 4. Select Record Far Circumference 4 to move to abnormal points. This deer has 0 abnormal points on the far side. However, although almost hidden, there is 1 abnormal point on the close side. Select 1 for the close abnormal points and then continue measuring abnormal points. Examine your deer closely for unique or abnormal points. This abnormal point was nearly hidden by the deer's main beam. When complete, select Record Close Abnormal Tine. You have completed measuring a deer at the 90-degree image orientation. To see your score sheet, select Complete Scoring.